it's a question that I've asked, and it's one where I've said I don't see a reason why the federal government should be forcing American families to reach into their pockets and take money out and use it to subsidize NPR and PBS. I think, separately, if you step back, it wasn't that long ago that if you looked at the cross section of your typical, NPR or PBS listener, it was a fair representation of the cross section of the country. But over the last couple of years, it has really started to skew to a very sort of narrow political perspective. And if you're going to be asking the American public to reach into their pocketbooks and subsidize it, I think it only makes sense for PBS and NPR to be responsive to that broad cross section of the country. So where we are right now is the federal government has what's called a rescissions package before it. It's in the Senate. They have a deadline to act, I think, within the next couple of weeks to make a decision about whether they're going to agree with that rescissions package and ultimately defund NPR and PBS. A couple months ago, I remember Sheryl Crow famously on Twitter posted that she was selling her Tesla, I guess in protest of Elon Musk at the time. That was, the thing to protest at the time. And she was selling the proceeds, taking the proceeds and giving it to NPR and PBS. And I was like, great, that's a perfect example. If you care so much about it, let the market work and let it be funded by those people that really care about it. But let's not put that burden on everybody.
Well, we're hearing from FCC Chairman Brendan Carr today. Do you ever wonder what the FCC does? It touches your life every day. In fact, I would say every hour of every day, something the FCC does impacts you, whether it's your cell service, your satellite service, your internet, competition for cheaper prices of cell phone packages. All of this is really basic. It's not as complicated as it sounds. So we're going to talk to the chairman of the FCC, Brendan Carr, today about this. First, can I encourage you to click that subscribe button? Just subscribe so you never miss an episode. We've got an amazing catalog of past stuff as well, but we loved it. It doesn't cost you anything. So just click that subscribe button and never miss an episode. Brendan Carr has been associated with the Federal Communications Commission for a long time. He is another voice saying that taxpayers, all of us, we should not be paying for PBS and NPR. We're going to talk to him about that and many other things. Fascinating conversation. Stay tuned. Commissioner Carr, welcome to the Michele Tafoya podcast. Glad to meet you.
Yeah, so good to be with you. Thanks. Been a big fan of yours and the show, so really good to be on with you today.
Well, there's so much to discuss. Let's just start with all of the complaints about the lack of warning down in Texas for these floods. And there's been a lot of misinformation out there. People have politicized this. But what can you tell us about what the situation actually was down there and how it could be improved? Some of the stories that we tell on this podcast could keep you awake at night, but here's what you can do to help. It's called Sleep Cream, CREME.com. It's an all-natural CBD-based topical that you put right on your skin at bedtime. I usually put it on the insides of my forearms, maybe the bottoms of my feet, and they smell fantastic. While the lavender is my favorite, they have a new rose-scented one out that is Sleep Cream Rose. It's awesome. But here's the best part. It works. And if it doesn't work for you, just let them know, and they'll give you your money back within the first 30 days. That's a guarantee. That's a guarantee. Sleep Cream, CREME.com. Use the code HOMERUN at checkout to get free standard shipping on your first order. That's the code HOMERUN at checkout for free standard shipping on your first order. If you want to sleep better, use what I use. That is Sleep Cream. Sleep, CREME.com, sleepcream.com. Well, there's so much to discuss. Let's just start with all of the complaints about the lack of warning down in Texas for these floods. And, there's been a lot of misinformation out there. People have politicized this. But what can you tell us about what the situation actually was down there and how it could be improved?
Yeah, well, first of all, obviously, what a horrible tragedy. My heart goes out to all the families out there, just unbelievable circumstances and also heroic efforts as well. I mean, we saw, one of those Coast Guard swimmers who went out there and saved hundreds of lives at the end of the day. And as well, there was obviously a boys camp not too far away. And there's been really interesting stories coming out of there about the heroic efforts of some of the counselors there. So it's great, great to see that. But obviously, generally tragedy. the federal government, the FCC, we facilitate multiple different types of emergency alert systems. It's a voluntary program, meaning that the cell phone carriers themselves voluntarily choose to participate. And then consumers can actually opt in or opt out of receiving those alerts. And there's lots of different types of entities that can originate alerts, or what we call alert originators. At this point, what we're seeing is that the National Weather Service did put out alerts. We're continuing to track and monitor. It's still early days in terms of all of that, but we're looking at many different features of the system right now.
I mean, in the end, this is as you said, a terrible tragedy. Things happen like this, and it was in the middle of the night, and it happened very, very fast. I'm sure this will be looked at, but I want to dig in just a second on what the FCC actually does, kind of FCC 101, if you can nutshell it for people. The Federal Communications Commission, of which you are the commissioner, what the overall purpose of this commission is?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the FCC is what we call an administrative agency. We're in Washington, D.C. We're about 1,300 or 1,400 people. And maybe one simple way to think about it is we're sort of like a mini Congress for all things sort of tech and telecom. So we regulate, the airwaves that are used for cell phone service. We run a program that subsidizes rural internet builds. We license all of the TV and radio broadcast stations that are out there. We have a public safety bureau where we do a lot of national security work. So, for instance, you may have heard of Huawei and ZTE and threats from the CCP trying to infiltrate our networks. We take action there to block them from connecting to our networks or to get that gear out. In fact, obviously very topical right now, there's been discussions of purchase of farmland all around U.S. military bases by entities tied to the CCP. Well, the first wave that we saw of that was Huawei and ZTE cell phone gear going into those very same parts of the country around sensitive military bases. So the FCC took action there as well. So the FCC is run by a number of commissioners. I'm a commissioner, also the chairman of the agency, and we ultimately, vote on decisions and enact sort of rules and regulations relating to telecom.
Well, that is interesting that you bring up Huawei and the like, because this TikTok deal, I don't know how involved the FCC is in this, but what can you tell us? Because it seemed to me that in the last couple of years, there were a lot of strong voices out there saying TikTok should not be on your kids' phones. It shouldn't be on anyone's phones. We got to ban it in the United States. It's a way for the CCP to get our data. Where do things stand? Why does this keep slipping? I know the president keeps talking about making a good deal. What does that look like?
Yes, this is not an issue directly before the FCC at this point, but as you indicated, Congress passed a law, bipartisan basis, that found national security concerns with the current structure of TikTok. And Congress also put a couple mechanisms in place. One, that would allow a delay in the implementation of that law. And two, it allowed for new measures to be put in place to ensure the safety of users. So it doesn't necessarily require, the closing or shutting down of TikTok, but it does require some sort of new actions to mitigate. And President Trump and his team have been working on this. And I think they've indicated recently that they're looking at a deal to try to make some changes here. But ultimately, this is now in the hands of the White House, and I'm confident that they're going to make the right decision, both as a general matter, but also with respect to our national security concerns, too.
I recently spoke to David Bazell, who's the head of the Media Research Center, very in favor, as many conservative groups are, of defunding PBS and NPR. And this one reminds me of the 2012 presidential elections when Mitt Romney said he was going to defund it, and people said, "Oh no, he's going to kill Big Bird." Well, it turns out that now HBO has bought Sesame Street and all of the entities. It was clearly a commercially viable product, and now it has been. So why are we funding NPR and PBS?
I think it's a really good question. It's a question that I've asked, and it's one where I've said I don't see a reason why the federal government should be forcing American families to reach into their pockets and take money out and use it to subsidize NPR and PBS. I think, separately, if you step back, it wasn't that long ago that if you looked at sort of the cross section of your typical, NPR or PBS listener, it was a fair representation of the cross section of the country. But over the last couple of years, it has really started to skew to a very sort of narrow political perspective. And if you're going to be asking the American public to reach into their pocketbooks and subsidize it, I think it, only makes sense for PBS and NPR to be responsive to that broad cross section of the country. So where we are right now is the federal government has what's called a rescissions package before it. It's in the Senate. They have a deadline to act, I think, within the next couple of weeks to make a decision about whether they're going to agree with that rescissions package and ultimately defund NPR and PBS. But to your point about commercial operations, I launched an investigation into NPR and PBS a little while ago because they have special status under the FCC's regulation. So one, as a general matter, every radio and TV broadcaster has a public interest obligation, meaning they need to operate in the public interest. They're not just like anyone with a podcast or a soapbox on the street. They've been given a special right, a privilege to use these airwaves. And so they have an obligation. But NPR and PBS, it's doubly so because they're non-commercial stations. So they get extra benefits. But if you look at some of their programming, they're running things that look an awful lot like regular commercial advertisements. And so we've been examining those potentially ads. They would call it, sponsor identification, but we're going to figure that out. But that could be further evidence of, they seem to have the capacity to generate revenue on their own. And so maybe that might be another reason why we don't need to force the American people to subsidize it.
Well, that's the thing. There are plenty of donors, and I'm kind of tired of being told what I should be paying for, and by a lot of wealthy people who want to keep these things afloat. It's up to them. I mean, if they want to, they can do it on their own.
Yeah, that's right. It reminds me, a couple months ago, I remember Sheryl Crow famously on Twitter posted that she was selling her Tesla, I guess in protest of Elon Musk at the time. That was, the thing to protest at the time. And she was selling the proceeds, taking the proceeds and giving it to NPR and PBS. And I was like, great, that's a perfect example. If you care so much about it, let the market work and let it be funded by those people that really care about it. But let's not put that burden on everybody.
Yeah, I would say the same thing about Planned Parenthood, by the way. I mean, plenty of people want to support that. They can. I don't want my tax dollars going toward that particular entity. It seems to me they raise a lot of funds outside of government. They can get by with that. Some other things that you've got going on, this Build America agenda, which you announced in South Dakota, which is one of my favorite states.
Yeah,
but what is the Build America agenda?
Yeah, we're really excited about this. You may remember, last year, President Biden and Vice President Harris, they were in charge of this $42 billion effort to get millions of Americans connected to the internet for the first time. And of course, famously, thousands of days went past and not a single shovel's worth of dirt was turning. Not a single person, home, business was ever connected under their watch through that program. And what President Trump has come in is he stepped in and said, we're really fundamentally changing the trajectory of this country when it comes to our economy. And broadband build is one of a big piece of what he's changing. And so I was out in South Dakota, as you indicated just recently, and gave a speech where I unveiled the FCC's Build America agenda. And it's pretty simple. One, we've got to get those shovels turning dirt again. And that also includes all the tower climbers that are out there building this internet infrastructure. I announced this at a tower climber company that I've spent a lot of time with, climbed dozens of towers with some of their crews at this point. I mean, they're just the best salt of the earth people. And our job in DC should be making their job just a little bit easier. So we're going to streamline the permitting rules. We're going to cut red tape to make it easier to build infrastructure. Second, we are freeing up the airwaves. Again, when you turn on your phone, most people just, assume it works. If they think about it, maybe they think it's magic or pixie dust, but it's actually these invisible airwaves that are regulated by the FCC. And we need to move more of those airwaves into the commercial marketplace. And in fact, the One Big Beautiful Bill restores the FCC's authority to move those airwaves out in the commercial marketplace because it lapsed during the Biden years. So we're going to get more airwaves out there, which again will connect people, get the economy growing. We're also looking at our space economy. The U.S. needs to continue to dominate when it comes to this next generation of satellites that are going up in space. It's really sort of economic leadership, but it's also national security as well. So there's a lot of features of what we're doing, including deregulation at the agency to get America building again. And it's all thanks to President Trump and his agenda that's, driving things forward.
Well, Chairman Carr, and I think I called you commissioner earlier, which is not incorrect, but you are the chairman.
Right. It is both. You're right. It's both.
It is both. But I want to give you props. So, Chairman, it seems as though what the president's overall agenda has to do with a number of things, but the big picture thing is prosperity, allowing people to become involved in the pursuit of prosperity, which can help in the pursuit of happiness and health and everything else that we do. But it seems to me he wants to unleash this. And a lot of that is happening through deregulation and through these efforts to take government out of the way. How much of that can you really do you think?
Yeah, we're doing a lot. We launched a proceeding at the FCC titled In Re Delete, Delete, Delete. Sometimes the best part is no part at all. And we are going through, every single page of the Code of Federal Regulations. It's, multiple inches, of multiple volumes of books at this point, and we're just looking to shrink it down.
Yeah.
But to your point too, we're really working to unleash economic prosperity, and we see that with blue collar workers. I mean, people think about tech and telecom in DC. We got all these lawyers and lobbyists here, but it's really, hardworking blue collar workers, people that I've spent time climbing towers with, that get the job done. And we've been making sure to focus on them, and so that, the dignity of their work is rewarded. And we've seen new commitments from across the telecom industry under President Trump to increase wages, to make sure that those jobs are, safe. We are cutting out sort of foreign undocumented workers from getting up on these cell phone towers, which is, one, unsafe, two, it can be national security issues, but three, it undercuts wages for these tower workers. So we've made a lot of changes in terms of the compensation structure so that the tower climbers and blue collar workers, are making a wage they can raise their family on.
You've used this term tower climbers quite a bit, like it's just like I've used the term linebackers in my past life. So I want to get an idea of what this means. These are the guys that so the towers get built. Do they get built by the tower climbers, or how are they built?
Yeah, exactly. They're built over time by tower climbers, and they're maintained. And I've had the chance to do everything from get to the top of a 2,000-foot broadcast tower in Rowena, South Dakota. The very first time I went up this broadcast tower, you're 2,000 feet up. It was in the fall in South Dakota. It was snowing, which was actually a really good thing because it was snowing and my teeth were chattering, and I could say that I was cold as opposed to the truth, which was, they might have been chattering more from, fear of being that. I was
going to say, what is that like up there? How 2,000 feet? That's
it's unbelievable. It changed your perspective, and so much of the agenda that we're driving at the FCC from an infrastructure perspective is meeting directly with these tower crews and saying, what slows you guys down? What makes your job harder? And we take that back here inside the Beltway and get some changes done. But yeah, it's amazing. They're amazing people. It's amazing work. It's hard work. And, if we can make their job a little easier, that's, one of our big focuses here.
All right. How much pushback have you gotten? You mentioned, there are some costs and some threats by allowing illegal migrants, immigrants, whatever you want to call them, aliens, to do that work, whether it's a national security issue, whether it's a safety issue. What's been the pushback? Because that is one of the topics du jour here, Chairman, that, taking away jobs from well-meaning, hardworking people who may not be here with documentation.
Yeah, I've been really pleased so far with the progress that we've made. We've been in discussions with the major wireless companies and working with them to make sure that in their contracting process, we're not bringing in, fly-by-night, undocumented 1099 crews. We're putting new protections in place. I think it's being really well received. The other thing we've been driving at the FCC as well is, moving away from DEI. One of the very first things that I did as chairman was I ended the FCC's own promotion of DEI. We had DEI listed as our second highest strategic priority, which, for the Federal Communications Commission, that seems very odd to be promoting DEI rather than just focusing on connecting Americans. I've been pleased to see a lot of the industry players, including just recently T-Mobile made a new announcement that they're ending their own promotion of DEI as specified in a letter that they filed with us. So I think that's, really good to see things changing on that.
Is that happening because their arms are being twisted? Or do you think that companies like T-Mobile really prefer it this way, to say, look, we're going to hire the best and the brightest. We don't care how they identify?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, one of the things that I did when I came in as chair is frankly, I told everybody that I thought they needed to get busy making sure that they weren't engaged in invidious forms of DEI discrimination. Plus, obviously, President Trump came in with an executive order. I think that stuff, helped. But I do think as a cultural matter, I think the country generally is moving away from that sort of extreme form of DEI discrimination. I mean, obviously, we want equal opportunity, but something I think went awry in this country, I don't know, roughly 2018 or so, where, all of this new forms of what I describe as invidious forms of DEI discrimination, meaning actually discriminating based on race, came in. And I do think the tide is moving on that as a general matter.
Do you sense that not just in your own commission, but across government?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I really think that things have shifted on that. There's still more work to be done. I've got a letter recently that I sent out to ABC, Disney, on some of their DEI practices. I really think that, Disney was sort of a leading edge. I don't think they were sort of reacting to a trend in DEI. I think, Disney was really promoting it pretty seriously. And so we're looking at that because Disney does own, TV broadcast stations. There's a hook there for the FCC to make sure they're not violating any of our equal opportunity rules. And we're going to continue to run that down. But I do think this sort of surge in DEI that we saw, and relatedly, frankly, this surge in censorship across the country is also receding. I mean, when we were living through COVID-19, we just saw this unprecedented surge in censorship. And it's natural, right? Because whenever you have increase in government control, which we had with COVID, you necessarily have a decrease in free speech, because free speech is the check on government control. And right now, we're sort of an exception. You look at Europe right now, there's just a massive crackdown on free speech. There was just a Wall Street Journal report that was focusing on England, and they were just having dozens and dozens of arrests every single day now for, memes that people are posting on the internet, the authorities there don't like. Look at Brazil. They're continuing to sort of have massive censorship, including trying to shut down social media companies that allow free speech. And so I think that's sort of the ghost of Christmas future, but for the fact that President Trump has come in and really made a commitment to restoring free speech. It's core to who we are as a culture. Obviously, it's enshrined in the First Amendment, but we really lived through a tough time there. And again, I think whether it's DEI or free speech, I think we're finally, coming out the other side of that.
I hope that's the case, because so many of us do recall what happened during COVID, and that if you even, tried to suggest an idea of maybe where it came from or how we might handle it or what might be the cure, or do we really have to wear these masks? I mean, it was bizarre. It was a bizarre time here in America. And I do hope we're on a trajectory in the opposite way and back to just, you can say whatever the hell you want. Now, there might be consequences for that socially or wherever, but you're not going to be, as in England, as you mentioned, in London and places in the UK, be thrown in jail for 24 hours because you posted a meme. I mean, that to me is insane.
Yeah, look, free speech, diversity of thought, that's how we solve our most difficult, pressing
Absolutely.
problems, and ultimately how we come together. I mean, you mentioned obviously COVID-19. I mean, the idea that you couldn't have a discussion about the origins of COVID-19 without potentially being censored, have a discussion about the pros and cons of masking for young children that are trying to learn speech in school. I mean, these were some core things that we were blocked from, and it's a shame because it wasn't that long ago that there was real bipartisan consensus on the value of free speech. In fact, if you go back to the early 1970s, the modern day op-ed actually launched on the pages of the New York Times, of all places. There was an editor there, John Oakes, a progressive at the time, and he launched it because he said he wanted views that were divergent from the ones you would get from traditional editors of the New York Times. I think his quote was, diversity of opinion is the lifeblood of democracy. The moment we insist that everybody think the same way we do, our democratic way of life is in jeopardy. That was the New York Times in the 1970s. Then flash forward 50 years, and a sitting senator, Tom Cotton, puts an op-ed in the New York Times, and all of a sudden the whole editorial board basically gets fired for it. So I do think that, we went through a wild period of censorship there, and we need to keep fighting to restore free speech because it is so, core and vital to who we are as a people. But it's also, I think, frankly, it ties into the economics as well, because when you feel, suppressed, you're not just censoring words, you're censoring ideas. And, ideas is how we innovate. So I think that's part of how you feel this, blanket lifting off the country, is censorship's lifting and opportunity is rising again. I think people feel good about that.
Yeah. It's not to say that, because I have criticized people. There was a woman down in Houston who said something awful about the Camp Mystic and the girls who attended Camp Mystic. It was absolutely vile what she said. So she had the freedom to say it. She hasn't been arrested, but her own boyfriend disavowed her comments. Many people have critiqued her comments. Yeah. She went into it saying, I'm probably going to get canceled for this. Fine. There may be consequences, but you're not going to suffer those at the hands of the government, right? So that's the difference, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think that's what we saw is, particularly during the Biden years, you had government officials that were, directly reaching out to social media companies and putting pressure on them to block disfavored political opinions, scientific views, religious views.
Right.
And I think that just crosses a line. It crosses a line, frankly, drawn by the First Amendment. That's why one of the things that I've, committed to doing here in this job is to work towards smashing this censorship cartel that's existed. And frankly, we're working across government. The Federal Trade Commission chairman, Andrew Ferguson, is doing great work on this as well. But you shouldn't have government officials that are, calling up companies and pressuring them to block the ability of everyday Americans to speak. And to your point, that doesn't mean that, there's no mechanism at all such that everybody has to hear and see vile speech they don't want. But I think the answer here is let's let everybody participate in the digital town square. If another participant in the town square doesn't like it, they can block the person, they can mute the person. But the problem is when you have the government coming in from the top and dictating who gets to participate in this digital town square, what can they say, it's a problem. Because either, the government is either merely fallible or they're biased. And so either way is a problem. But let's get the power back to individual people to make their own minds up about what they want to listen to and what speech they want to say.
Yeah, the idea of the First Amendment, the idea of it is far more powerful than any person overseeing it. Let me ask you this. You mentioned the cartel of censorship or a censorship cartel. How much of that still lingers?
Yeah, we're working hard to make progress on this. It takes a couple of different features. One, obviously, was the government itself. That is ending. There's no more pressuring as far as I'm aware of on companies who censor everyday Americans in terms of what they say. Two, President Trump has a lot of efforts going on right now to uncover exactly what happened during these last 4 years. And Secretary Rubio at State Department has been doing great work at exposing different components of State Department that were engaged in this. But there's other aspects of it as well. You've got the advertising and marketing companies that have effectively been, working together to create this sort of gatekeeper approach, and they will deny funding to websites or outlets that they don't like. And I think that's an area where, again, we're making some progress, but there's more progress to be made. And I think we're going to.
But aren't they allowed to do that? I mean, if I'm a commercial entity, aren't I allowed to decide where I spend my money?
Well, one issue there has to do with competition policies. And if you are sort of colluding on an aspect of, a competitive feature, that's potentially a problem under our anti-competition authorities. In fact, this is something that FTC Chairman Ferguson has spoken about as well, as if you're sort of colluding to not compete on a certain aspect, including speech, that's a problem under our sort of competition authorities.
Gotcha. It's so interesting. There's a lot in your purview, but I'm sure that one thing I'd like to ask you before we wrap up here is just, it's astonishing to me to see how much has happened in this administration. The man, Trump was inaugurated in January. You and I are talking in July, and so much has happened. Do you feel a sense of, we got to get stuff done. We got to make hay while the sun is out. We've got to get this stuff done. We've got this window, and there's no guarantee a Republican will be elected after Trump. So it seems to me like there's almost this sense of urgency to get things done. What are you sensing?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think, again, a lot of this flows from President Trump. I mean, talk about a high energy individual. He's getting a lot done. And I think everyone in government in Washington, we're looking to him and we're seeing how much he's doing. We're looking around and seeing it, chairs and heads of other agencies and departments, how much they're doing. And it's sort of a healthy competition where all of us, I think, are competing to deliver wins. And to your point, we know we have to go fast. I mean, every single day is a day that you're never going to get back. An administration is a time-limited period. It's 4 years. The most precious thing you have is time. And so I think all of us have been moving quickly to not waste it. And for my own part, I've had the benefit of being here at the FCC for a long time. I actually started as a staffer here back in 2012. I actually had hair back then when I started at the agency. And I had a chance to work for a commissioner. I was then general counsel of the agency. I've been a commissioner in the minority, a commissioner in the majority, and now chair. So I've sat basically in every single seat. And that's allowed us here at the FCC to hit the ground running very, very quickly. But again, I think you see that across the board. And it has been a very high pace of action across all the agencies. And it's good. I think we're feeding off each other. It's a very sort of positive competition in some ways.
That's what it sounds like. It sounds like you've been freed to do things that maybe you weren't under these commissions, these agencies weren't under the previous administration. That there is life, that there is energy. I
Yeah,
love that thought of competition between agencies and commissions,
yeah.
because I mean that to me is what it's all about. And you mention it as friendly and positive. This is all good stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, everyone's having a lot of fun. I mean, again, I love the FCC, but getting to be chair, getting to get your ideas across the finish line, it's a blast. You wake up energized. You work hard during the day. We've got a great team of people all around us, and again, I think you're seeing that across the board. President Trump gives a lot of people sort of a general North Star. You can sort of pick up on, head in this direction, but you get a lot of leash to figure out exactly how to do it, and it's empowering. And again, I think that's why you see a lot of quick, good actions across the administration. We're having a lot of fun, but it's thanks to him.
Okay, well, before I let you go, then what is the one thing you want to make sure you get completed before your time is up?
Well, executing on this build agenda is the most important thing. We're going to get permitting reform done. We're going to make progress on spectrum. We're going to boost America's space economy.
And
I
what
think
is
that's very
spectrum?
important. Yeah, spectrum absolutely is in there as well. And then media. I mean, look, we've got a lot of regulations that govern TV and radio broadcasters. I think we have an opportunity there to make sure that they have the opportunity to compete in this sort of much more dynamic media landscape as it exists today. But also, at the same time, reminding these broadcasters that they're different. They do have a public interest obligation. I do think that when you look at trust in media, it's really at an all-time low. But really, it's at the national, traditional media level. So ABC, CBS, NBC, local news, local reporters are still very trusted. Let alone obviously new media, very trusted as well. So one of the things I want to do is I want to empower those local broadcasters, but effectively, shrink the power of the national programmers. I think ultimately, if I can get that done, that'll be a good accomplishment.
Well, I wanted to give you a chance to define what spectrum is.
Yes, spectrum again is the airwaves that your cell phone and other sort of
okay.
wireless devices use. We use the term sort of interchangeably, but that's going to be key, is getting going on that, because that's driving prices down for consumers. The more spectrum we get out there, and so that's another sort of top area where we need to make some progress.
Is that why we're seeing, by the way, kind of celebrity owned or endorsed, like Minted Mobile? It's owned by a Hollywood star. It's interesting to me that we're not just confined to Verizon, AT&T. There are a lot of different carriers out there. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a pretty frothy, competitive environment right now. So you've got a handful of what we call sort of facilities-based companies. So that's your AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile that have the radios, have the cell towers that they're on. But then you have what these other companies we call MVNOs, which is their virtual, meaning they sort of buy minutes effectively in bulk from these other companies, and they turn around and sell it. And they find sort of niche portions of the market to appeal to. So it's a really competitive space right now, which we're happy about. But also, again, this new generation of satellites that are going up are fantastic. Not just Starlink, but Kuiper is getting going as well. There's a new service that's what we call direct-to-cell technology. So your smartphone, rather than connecting to a cell tower, is increasingly going to be able to connect directly to a satellite. And that connection, that speed, that service is going to get better as well. And so you'll ultimately have no dead zones anywhere in the country, because you can always see a satellite. So as direct-to-cell technologies continue to sort of mature over these next couple of years, that's going to be a good benefit as well for consumers that we're really excited about.
It's all really interesting, intriguing, and good stuff to watch. And I appreciate your taking the time to share it with us. This is a topic I don't think people dig deep into enough, but it touches our lives every single minute of every single day. So thank you so much, Chairman.
Yeah, great to be with you. Thanks so much.
Likewise. And as I end every podcast, I say, be brave, do good, have the courage to push the envelope a little bit, but do it with your best intentions in mind. And we'll see you next time. Hey, you can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.